the fact that he was always the best prepared person in the room, the fact that he had a unique relationship with our president, a great foreign policy president, George H.W. Bush. And maybe we should begin the questioning there on German unification, Mr. Secretary, by asking you about your relationship with President Bush. You came into the White House and the State Department in January of 1989 after the president's victory. Did you think in January, February 1989 that there was any possibility of a big event that might lead to the end of the Cold War?
Well, thank you very much, Nick. But before I answer that, let me first say how delighted I am to be back up here at Harvard, even though I went to Princeton. And back in those days, we used to beat you in football. We don't do that anymore. We had the Heisman Trophy winner, if you remember. You all were too young to remember that. Last time an Ivy Leaguer was a Heisman Trophy winner was when Richard Kazmaier, the class of 1952, which was my class, won the award. And by the way, we're going back this year for our 60th reunion. But it's great to be back up here in Harvard and to see all of you. And before I answer Nick's question, let me say that your professor, Burns, did an extraordinary job himself in serving this country of ours. And he was in the Foreign Service for I don't know how many years, but I know for a fact he was there for the full 4 years that I was Secretary of State, and for the full 4 years of the first term, at least, of President George W. Bush. So when did I think that something like the end of the Cold War might occur on our watch? And we didn't think that. We hoped that might happen. We certainly were never sure that it would happen. The fall of the wall in November of '89 really came as a surprise to most of the policymakers. You know, we knew maybe a month or so, maybe in September, I think it was, Hungary opened her border. And after that border was opened, East Germans began to flood out, and it wasn't too long after that, in November, that a low-level East German official announced, in a routine announcement, I don't think he understood the significance of what he was saying, but he said the border is going to be open, or there will be free transit between one spot and another in Berlin. That, of course, was what triggered the fall of the wall. And that's what triggered, at least on our part, the imperative of trying to make sure that the Cold War, as it ended peacefully, that it ended with a whimper and not with a bang. It didn't have to end with a whimper, but I think President George H.W. Bush was smart enough to understand, wise enough, had enough foreign policy experience. After all, he'd been our ambassador to China, he'd been director of the CIA, he'd been a UN ambassador, and he got a lot of grief at the time the wall fell for not gloating and pounding the chest and being more emotional about the fact that finally, after 40 years, the West, led by the United States, had won the Cold War. And I remember we'd sit in these meetings and he'd say, you know, one thing we ought to do is make sure we don't gloat. I don't want to hear anybody gloating about this, because we got a lot of business to do still with Gorbachev and Shevardnadze. And that took a wise man to adopt that position in the face of a lot of domestic criticism. I never will forget a huge press conference shortly after the wall fell in the Oval Office, and he was sitting at his desk and I was right there at his right side, and we had a ton of press there and they were beating up on, why can't you be a little more emotional? He finally looked up at him and he said, look, we got some business still to do. We're not going to dance on the ruins of the wall. And it was a very, very wise thing to do. We didn't anticipate that the wall would come down as rapidly as it did. I was hosting a lunch on the 8th floor of the State Department for President Corazon Aquino, who was president of the Philippines, when an aide passed me a note that says the East Germans have announced that the Berlin border is going to be open. And I immediately left the lunch, went down, got on my special phone, talked to the president, went over to the White House, and we started talking at that point about how we're going to react to these events.
Mr. Secretary, let's take you through, and you have take us through the